Yeah, so it makes sense. So you put on this, and there will be any bulk. So we have that will go to everyone.
These are the questions.
I think so, yeah. Live on YouTube. All right, I'd like to call the workshop to order, if we could. This is a workshop, it's not a meeting, so we'll be a little more informal in the proceedings. And today's focus is departmental budgets, sort of the round one look at what the town administrator and her staff have put together with what they know of changes from last year and things coming up in the new fiscal year. And my suggestion to the board would be that we go through department by department and sort of focus on the change items. But if there's an item that didn't change that anybody has questions about, certainly we could talk about it. But I would suggest that we not go through line item by line item. We can do that on our own and come up with any questions that we have. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. All right, and anybody, well, fire. Okay, I was gonna say anybody in the room who needs to go early, and I know there is one person. If it's okay with the board, let us start with the fire department because Ralph has another commitment. Is that all right with everybody? All right, so let's get down to fire and rescue. Vika, do you have any opening comments, anything that you want to talk about to kick things off?
No, just all of you received kind of a couple of summaries, more or less, about any of the anticipated changes or what some of those changes would. There was a summary that was provided by the fire department as well. And so I would encourage you to use that to kind of kick off any questions or discussions that you might have in addition to anything else that you might want to bring up.
Ralph, any opening comments?
I'm just taking notes. I know nothing.
You could be a select board then. Chief. Or chief, yeah. Any comments, Ralph?
I think we'll just ask the questions we can answer.
Okay, all right. So to the board, any questions, comments on any of the individual items or the summary?
Can you remind me which department?
That is Department
2200.
2200, yeah?
It starts on page 7 of the expense report that you received for the departmental budget document. And there was, within the paperwork that was provided in terms of a brief summary from the fire department, there was also a brief summary that was provided by Jeff Westcott, who's the president of the nonprofit, just briefly summarizing what the nonprofit has been used for. And so if you have any additional questions, I'm sure Ralph can elaborate.
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
Is there a cost of living increase in any of the wages?
The cost of living increase historically has and tends to go to employees. And so for the permanent employees, there is a cost of living. But for the departments such as fire department, where they're paid on a volunteer basis at an hourly rate, I did check with some other municipalities, and that, I mean, unless the board makes that decision to have it be applicable to that, that doesn't typically apply to those kind of positions. So the cost of living is not included within the fire department personnel and the volunteers who get paid for.
And does that apply to, are there other people in the community, other positions that applies to as well?
No, so all of the positions that we have within the town, if they are over 18 and a half hours and are higher town employee, they qualify for benefits. And so those are the employees that if there's a COLA increase recommendation, it is applicable to. The only people that are an exception is the cemetery attendant, and it's somebody that has been with us for several years. It's a permanent position, and they don't get benefits, but because it's a consistent position, they do get the COLA increase. The fire department is the only department within the town department where the people are still considered volunteers. And that's how there is an hourly rate that the fire department will provide us a sheet of what the hours are for each. They're paid on a quarterly basis on an hourly rate, but there is no annual COLA increase that is incorporated within those hourly rates.
And what towns did you check with?
So typically when I check any information like that, I will send out like an email to either we have ability to send out an email to all the managers within the Maine municipal system, or on a monthly basis. For the most part, on a monthly basis, there is a Southern Maine managers meeting, and so we get on like an hour-long Zoom, and then it's within those conversations that these kind of typical questions ask, and it was within that conversation that that question was raised.
I asked that the shade behind you be pulled down.
Can you not
It's
see me?
so bright behind
Like
you.
the halo thing doesn't work.
Can't see your face. Is everybody tall?
Okay, all
Liza and Richard, there's also on the MMA website some extensive data, survey data relative to wages across the state of Maine. And you can slice and dice it a lot of different ways. Like you can look at the data for towns under 3,000 people, for example. I don't think they have a breakout for islands, unfortunately, but size of town is one of the things you can break out on. So it's a good resource.
With the COLA, the way that the last couple of years have recommended the COLA increase is based on what other municipalities, so the MMA will provide kind of across the state, anyone that participates in it. We also get a huge chain of emails that when the managers start receiving that information, they kind of reply all and it goes to everybody. The information that I tend to use is from the specific Southern Maine Managers meeting, and it is run by JP Cog, and so he'll typically send out an email. This year it's a little bit late, so it's been more or less off of verbal discussions that I've taken the information, but what I typically have done is gone a little bit below what the average is, just to try to make it, more fair to the taxpayers, while still providing something to the employees, but not asking for too high of a rate, knowing that a lot of these towns are far bigger than we are with far higher tax pool than we have.
So, obviously, I'm not neutral, but I do appreciate how important and valuable it is to have someone like Ralph with his area of expertise, how critical it is for things to run smoothly, and I think it's easy to underestimate how much that takes to get that done. I just want to acknowledge that.
The last couple of years, I think the fire department has worked really hard to try to make it more fair for the people that are on the department. So it was, I think, this is the third budget season where the hourly rate that they were receiving went from about, I think it was $13 or $14 an hour to $25 an hour. Within that discussion, there was an increase towards the fire chief's stipend. I think that if there's more of a conversation in terms of involving the fire department, and at this point with how those descriptions are, or those positions are described, still being volunteer, if you wanna discuss providing an annual increase, it's a significantly larger pool of employees than the combination of everything else.
Yeah.
So you're gonna see a dramatic increase to the budget if that's what you're in support. I think if that's the discussion you wanna go in, then you really should have the discussion of should some of these positions be more of a permanent employee position, with like the fire chief being a position, not a volunteer position, and things like that.
Oh, that's helpful, thank you.
Other thoughts, comments from the board? Gary?
Just on the heating, 2020, is that the whole building or is that just the fire
It's
department?
the whole building.
And then just remind me, because this has come up periodically, why we wouldn't put a heat pump in the building? Because there was just another program where there was a dual, rebate from combined with Efficiency Maine and TNC.
Yep, and that's a great question, and that's something that we just discussed looking into while we met. Up until just within the last couple of months, the entire building was totally maxed out on its electrical capacity, and so we just upgraded to the 400 amp, and we just had this conversation about now that it has the electrical capacity, potentially looking into having some heat pumps in some of the building.
Rob?
So can I talk to both of those?
Please.
So, go back to the wages.
Oh, well, you need to Sorry.
No, you could you're not being picked up, so you really gotta either speak up or
Okay,
get close.
can you hear me now? That work?
Talking and all that.
Okay, so the volunteers, we were talking about, paid volunteers, I would take an exception to the chief's position and the administrative assistant's position as well. That's more than just a volunteer position, and requires a lot more everything. I requested last year, and I've requested this year, the COLA for those two positions have nothing to do with the rest of the volunteers. That's separate. Why we went from $13 an hour, whatever it was, to 25 is because we had to start hiring per diems to cover EMS on the island. And we had to pay them $25 an hour because we couldn't get anybody for any less. So we went from 13 to 25 because we can't have a per diem there and then a volunteer there for 13. It would create too much animosity. I've seen that happen in plenty of other departments as they grow. So that's the whole thing there. But I would like to see a COLA for my position and the administrative assistant position too.
And the administrative position does have the COLA increase on it.
Admin got everything.
Yeah.
The heating in the building is, it's not simple. Back 2 or 3 town administrators ago, I used to take care of the maintenance, or oversee the maintenance for everything. I had the furnace taken away from me. They said, I don't need to worry about that. The town administrator, they said, that's not your responsibility anymore. So I haven't had anything to do with the maintenance on it. I don't know if there's been any maintenance on it. I get involved when the heat goes out to make sure that it gets fixed so the place doesn't freeze up. The 3 of the 4 heating units in the apparatus bay don't work. One of them, they all quit working this year. We had to have the doors open in the office to keep enough heat in the apparatus bay. John Rich's plumber connection came up and he got that one working, but we still need to get those other 3 fixed. So that's going to be very inefficient. So you've seen an increase in heating in the building over the last few years. Also, the office has grown. I'm sure keeping the washroom up to temperature now is constantly has increased it a little bit. We used to turn that down to like 50, 55 when we weren't using it. So those are the reasons for the increases there. The heat pumps, yes, as she said, we can now look at heat pumps because we have the ability to put them in electrical wise.
Sure.
So are you looking at heat pumps? I noticed the deadline for that program is March.
Nothing currently, no. We looked into them before. You had something to do with it, I believe, Dawn.
Well,
And there wasn't just an electrical issue, if I remember right. They said the building wasn't efficient enough to accept a heat pump.
Vaguely ringing some bells, but I
Yeah.
don't recall. Yeah.
although I agree that it's not well insulated, the thing that we looked at this, the climate action team also evaluated a while back, but the reality is they can be moved to a new facility, so that's one good thing about heat pumps is they're pretty easy to relocate. I think we put in air conditioning in the town office, and I think a heat pump would make more sense, so I would encourage the town, and I'm not sure who it is, because it seems like a weird arrangement with the heating situation. It sounds like no one's in charge, but I think we should explore the potential of installing heat pumps, and you could put our GP Cog resiliency fellow on that, because GP Cog is willing to help the town apply for the rebate. I don't know, because it's not my bag, whether it makes sense to do it or not, but I think we should look at it, rather than, and when you say, I don't know what you meant when you said 1 out of the 3 units or whatever are working, are these just heating? I don't know how it's set up.
So there's heating units, forced hot water heating units in the ceiling of the apparatus bay, and some of them just aren't working. And I agree with you. I think the heat pumps are a great way to go. Maybe in the office areas would be more better insulated. Maybe that would be a great thing, and then that would lessen the burden on
Right.
aging furnace.
Right.
It's kind of seems to be stretched. That
So-
could help.
That's just, that's my recommendation, is given the increasing cost to heat the place, but I do think we need to assign somebody as kind of responsible for the heating system in the building, because somebody should, right? I mean, I don't know.
I don't know if there's annual maintenance done to it or not, Drew.
Right, okay.
I don't know.
Jeff Westcott just had, all of the furnaces for all municipal buildings serviced. And the fire department was one of them.
Okay,
And the 3 are still non-functional?
In our meeting just recently, that was the first time that I had heard about that, so I don't know anything more than what Ralph is saying. The
Okay,
furnace.
so I'm gonna say we're drifting away from the
Right.
budget a little bit. Operationally speaking, I think Carol's suggestion of asking Ellie to do some information gathering would be great. And given Vika's impending schedule changes, would anybody on the board like to volunteer to work with Ellie on that investigation? Carol?
yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a big deal.
Okay. Thank you, Carol. Okay, moving along, other questions relative to the fire department, public safety budget, Carol?
Well, just on the turnout gear, I see you're replacing one set of gear. And, you know, is there funding available for grant programs for replacing turnout gear, given sort of the whole PFAS scene, or where does that stand? And are you applying for those?
So yes and no. So yes, the gear now has gone up from, like 5 years ago, it was $1,400, now it's like $3,800, $4,000, for the same type. We can apply for them, but we were ready to hire a grant writer, but we had some misinformation. It was significantly more money for the grant writer than we had been told. So we're working with a grant writer on the island right now to look into that. And that would be one of the things we would be applying for. We also, the association, a nonprofit, just bought 6 sets, or is in the process of buying it. We're getting them fitted Tuesday, I think it is. But we need to have in the budget at least a set a year just to replace the aging gear. But we will be looking into more grants in the future on that plan.
Other questions? I would ask, I guess, Vika, the question, the items that are listed in the memo regarding the fire department budget memo, are those increases discussed in that memo all baked into what we see in this budget? Or some of them?
So give me an example. Are you talking like heat and fuel,
Heating,
equipment
fuel.
maintenance?
Maintenance for equipment, building maintenance, line 4,000.
Building maintenance, there's no
So
increase.
it refers in the memo to line item 4,000, building maintenance.
Oh, building, we expect agent building will need improvements for heating and other agent equipment.
So that's, go ahead.
So Ralph and Beth and I met. We had a list of things that our fire department was gonna provide, summary. Denise provided the summary, and so I had follow-up questions relative to this summary
Okay,
and asked for more clarification with examples like this.
okay.
Asked them to come to be here to answer some of these questions, but I do still expect that we will receive further explanation, because line item 4,000 isn't something other than the heating system we really discussed, and so that's something that came up as a question to me.
Yeah, 2 years ago, in 2024, we spent 2,778. In 2025, we budgeted 4,000. In 2025, year to date, we've already spent 5,400. Okay, so that's another,
So that's to be determined, is that what you're saying?
sounds like,
Yes.
okay. And then the other items on that memo, I should have done this comparison myself in advance, training, talk about that. Is the grant writer conversation, is that the 1,800 increase in contract services?
No. So contract services, and this was another question I had asked the fire department to give me a breakdown of what goes into contracted services.
Okay.
And so I don't have the information, but maybe you can elaborate as far as,
Well, we did talk about a grant writer, I thought that was gonna be in the contracted services.
in our discussion, we talked about talking to, Adrian Cole, but there was no money in terms of figuring out how much to put in, because the conversation hadn't taken place, so there wasn't anything to. But contracted services, you guys had several things that were unexpected this year that came in that
So, well,
I wasn't aware of.
contracted services, that's been used, depends on which administrator we've gone with, it changes a little bit, but, originally it was started out just for dispatch, scheduled annual, whatever they charge us. Also, Yarmouth, is in there now, which they charge us, I can't remember how much off the top of my head, I don't want to misquote it, but they charge us a fee for transporting, on top of charging the patient, an annual fee. $5,000. Is that annual or biannual?
I believe it's annual.
Okay. So those, I think those are the only two things that I can think of that are in there.
Do you know what the dispatch fee is? I mean, it would just be good to know what
Yeah.
the services are for.
And that's what I'm hoping that I can get a breakdown of in each, because we can base it off, if we go into our, if we go into a detailed of all of these expenses, but this particular year, there's additional costs that the fire department has taken on that weren't previously within the budget, and so I had asked for, who is the vendor, what the anticipated cost is, and things like that.
So,
More
yeah, contracted services would be our dispatch, Seacoast Security for monitoring the alarm system at the firehouse and town office. Then we had the Yarmouth one, that was $5,000. And it says first and second quarter, but not sure. And then Verizon, which I think, we still get that because we get rid of the part that it's still on the phone. Yeah, so those are the contracted services.
So can you provide us with a copy of that?
Yep, it's right in the budget.
I don't have it.
Yeah,
We'll get you a list of a breakdown of more information.
if you want, I'm sure the apparatus maintenance will come up, equipment maintenance will come up, because that's an increase.
Where is that shown?
30, 40.
That's everything, so that's when Greenwood from Brunswick comes over, and that's where the biggest chunk of the money comes from. They change all the oils and filters and then put the truck and pump custom and everything, and the cost of everything goes up, labor rates and filters and oil and everything. And with aging fleet, as they get older, they cost more. Also, we started doing hose testing. We started hiring a company to do hose testing, which is pretty common. That's pretty much what everybody does now, which we have to do mandatory every year by OSHA. So that's an increase in that line item as well.
So what might be helpful is to see the detail from this year, because we're significantly over budget. So I have no problem with increasing the budget, but it would be helpful to know where the money's going.
Yeah, 2025 year-to-date on that line is 53% higher than 2024 actual for the whole year. So that's dramatically up.
34.76.
And I know the requirements are going up and everything, but it would be good to see the detail on that.
Yeah, the hose testing was $3,400 more this year.
And the overall increase was 6,400. That's part of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I, so
will Vika give you a copy? You're just gonna send them a
So,
copy of this? Or?
The email that I sent you guys after this memo, asking for clarifying questions, that's what I'm still waiting to receive from you.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna give them a breakdown of the expense department. What I'm hoping for is for a more thorough explanation from the fire department on what those things are, because if it says, you know, a description of the vendor and the cost, there will still be questions raised about what that vendor is and what is it for. And so if you can, between the three of you, look at the email that I sent you with the questions and
Yeah.
provide answers,
We
I
can do
will
that, we just
provide
need
that to
more
them.
time to
But
compile that.
my question was, is the board expecting a copy of this breakdown?
Yes.
'Cause- yes, okay.
Yes,
So
and
my
so that's
question
from
is,
Vika.
am I supposed to do that? or
No,
is
Vika
gonna
can
share that?
provide.
I can provide that, but if
Okay.
you can provide me
Yep.
answers to the questions in the email that I have, then
Yeah.
between those two things, they will have,
Yeah, I would rather see that detail after those questions get answered and baked into that detail.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
And is that detail going to answer, when I looked at the increase, is that just because the cost of the job is increased? Or is it due to, are there additional costs from the aging equipment?
Both.
Yeah.
Both.
Okay,
And
and that will
we have-
answer that?
we have such a thin budget when it comes to maintenance, everything, really. So if we, you know, a fuel filter is like $60. So if you have to change anything outside of just the normal fuel filters and oil, I mean, the cost of oil has gone through the roof. And it takes, each truck takes at least 6 gallons of oil. So, I mean, you can just in an oil change in one truck, it probably in the last 3 years, it's probably gone up a couple $100 at least, just in that. And then labor rates and everything.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, so we'll obviously have to come back to that one. Anything else? Okay. All right. Moving on, let's go back to the top of the page and start with Department 1300. Admin. Thanks, you guys, really appreciate it. So are all the admin comments included in the memo titled?
the admin memo. So with the admin budget, the major increases that you're going to see are in wages, membership dues, and training. And that is really all relevant to a big shift in change of positions and hiring new employees. This is the first fiscal year, 26, where the current employees that we have in all those positions, you're really budgeting the full amount for it, so you're seeing the increase. There is a change between wages full-time and part-time, and that's just simply because the positions have kind of shifted a little bit, and so it's swapped. As far as membership dues and training, there is an increase in those particular department. Membership dues is very specific to becoming a member of ICMA, which is also called Mission Square, which the town retirement is through it, but they have a very large, so what it is, it's International Managers Association. They have a very large pool of training materials. If we're a member, which is, like $600-700 membership, something like that annually, it provides at a significant discounted rate for training, whether they're Zoom trainings or in person, things like that. And then under training, you'll see an increase because I have allocated ability for the employees with us having a new bookkeeper to have some better bookkeeper training than what MMA offers, but then I've also allocated the funds for me to be able to go to the Managers Association, which is something that I have not done in the past because it requires a little bit more funding than what we had in there And no, that's really, as far as the overall admin budget, that's really where you're seeing the increase.
I would add that the total of wages from last year's budget to this proposed budget is up 6.8%, if I did that correctly.
That's right.
Which is $16,204. And just, if you look back sort of strategically and from a planning standpoint, part of what we were trying to accomplish was to boost our capacity in the town. I think that phrase was used frequently by both citizens and board members. So that's that one. One other question, Vika, contract services is down by 5,000. Does that relate to the labor situation?
That relates to Mitch.
Gotcha.
In the current budget, there is funds allocated for his services.
And you took that
With
down.
how little he has been utilized in this current budget, I don't see that we're gonna even expend that. And I don't see the need to budget it for next year.
And that's the only known expense in that category at this point in time, is the work with Mitch?
There is,
Print, I thought it was the,
there's something else in it, but I'd have to open up the detailed report. I don't remember. There's something like on an annual basis that we have that's minimal compared to it.
Okay.
But I'll put a note in and I'll look into that.
Thank you.
so we have had a significant increase in the wages from 2020. So if I have it right, we started off at 180, almost 181,000 in 2023, 225,000 in 24, 236 in 25, and now we're up to about 250. So pretty big increase in administrative wages, and I think we, as a board, with town administrator, need to be able to explain the benefit of that. So I think that's something I would like you to consider kind of, I think it was some of it's been an intentional effort. I think I'd also like to see the detail for the positions. I don't need to know who's who, but just so that I understand who we have, how many people we have and what types of positions and kind of what the cost is. And we've asked for that before.
Yep.
So just because I think that's a pretty big increase, I think, I hope you can describe to the community how that's beneficial to the community. And, I think that we need to kind of justify it is all I'm saying.
No,
So-
I totally understand that we, you look at the last 3 years, 4 years in personnel changes, and within those personnel changes, there has been very significant salary increases that have come with that. And it absolutely makes sense to have to be able to justify that to the community and explain how some of the positions that we have filled now, the cost of what it is to the taxpayers, those positions are so well operated by some of these individuals that, I would
Right,
be
and I
happy
think,
to stand behind it and justify why, this particular individual in this position, we have had to invest in them, has been a good thing for the community.
right, and I think some of it came from requests from the community that we get some qualified people in those positions. And the other thing is, I would expect that finance committee, if we're asking for kind of position information, they would you might want to share that with them too. So other than that though, I mean, it doesn't look like there's anything significant in terms of increases in the administrative budget, right? Just training.
Yeah, training and salaries.
And does that?
Postage, I increased postage just because our postage has gone up like crazy.
Two other considerations. One, this increase since 2023 that we just talked about in detail. The other slant that I would ask you to take a look at in terms of a conversation with the community would include what's next. My sense is that we've made a bunch of improvements and we're in pretty good shape, but it would be nice to be able to talk about that. What's the forward look? Do we expect more such changes, or are we where we need to be, that kind of thing? And then, lastly, at some point, when we come back for another round of discussions, I would just ask that we think about the contract services strategically. What do we need next year? As opposed to dropping it a little bit based on what happened this year. What is it that we need for next year, whether it's from Mitch or other people? But that's a conversation for later. That's all I have. Other comments? Liza?
I'm really glad that the opportunity for you to go to that annual event training is in there. And I think that my sense with the community, looking at how efficiently everybody's working up in town is good, but I agree that getting some better numbers around that would be good.
Do you want me to provide, so I can send you the detailed report of the expense breakdowns, that's easy, but as far as, maybe for the next budget, for the second draft, in terms of a detailed, do you want me to provide you something in written? I just, with some of these positions, it's all public information, it's all public record, but I also don't want to intentionally attach a name with it and really kind of single out a person or have the whole community. And so I just want to make sure that I provide you with the answers you're looking for, but doing it in a way where I'm not going to make some of these employees feel a little uncomfortable.
I think that I'd appreciate that, and if I have a specific question, I could ask you about it, but I like the idea that it's left with no identifying information.
Because some of the positions are easily identifiable.
It's all public, it's all public,
Yep.
with the exception of, personnel, folders, but at the same time,
Carol?
Yeah, you have provided it to us in the past in the form of a spreadsheet, no names attached, but I do think we need the detail in terms of the positions, the hours,
Yep.
the hourly rate, the benefits, so that we can really, I feel like I don't know what we have. And so I think I can send you that format that you used before.
We have a format that's so much better this year
Okay,
because
well, I
our
do, but
bookkeeper loves Excel spreadsheets, so we have a really organized one. But yes, I could send it to you.
I do think we do need that detail, and I get that, and I don't feel like it needs to be in a packet or anything, I'm just asking for that information, so I don't think it's.
So you would be fine if I were just send it to you without providing like
Yeah.
a more thorough report that I present to you with, okay?
That's what you did before, and I think that kind of keeps it on the down, keeps
Okay,
it.
yeah, that's fine. I have all of it. It's nice and organized and well broken down, so it'll be, yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Give me a-
all right. Everybody ready to move on?
Yep.
Okay. Next item, Department 1400, Assessors. Note under the 5,000 contract services, there's a note that says we'll be changing, do not yet know the amount. The current increase is at 2,400. Any further discussion needed there? All right. Moving along, election board and registers, it's up by $2,000.
Isn't it 7? Am I in the wrong one here?
I'm not-
Page 3?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got it backwards, okay.
Yeah, election board and registration, Department 1650, I should say, is up from 1,000 in 2025 budget to 3,000 in the current budget. Percentage-wise, it's a large increase. Anybody have any questions
No,
about that?
I mean, because it suggested paying them more per hour.
Yes.
Yeah. Other questions? David, Richard, you guys okay?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out exactly where we are. I got it.
Page
Okay.
3.
But we don't have, what do we have for elections? Does that vary with elections?
It does. It varies relative, staggered around, the presidential elections.
Right.
So every 4 years, that,
And the
third
other-
and fourth year is gonna be a little bit higher, and you can kind of see that pattern. These election workers, we have the same people for the most part that come here, and some of them sit here for 14 hours. And it was a volunteer, position, and they were getting $14 an hour, and I just bumped it up to 20 just to make it a little bit more worthwhile their time and to show a little bit more appreciation for the fact that they sit here for 10 to 14 hours some days.
Thank you, Vika.
All right, moving on, Department 1700, up by $150. Any need to talk about that? Okay, moving on to legal services. We increased it, budgetarily speaking, quite a bit last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And it's currently in there flat. Yeah, as we all know what's going on there, what we might need, we might wind up needing more than that. Okay. Department 2100, Law Enforcement Services. 2 lines are up significantly. The first one's $5,150, the second one's $2,600. It's wages and gasoline. Looks like the gasoline is up more than proportional to this year's year-to-date. Vicky, what are you thinking there?
So with this particular, the wage increase is relative to the parking attendant position expanding from 1 hour to an hour and a half, and also increasing it to, instead of like 19 or 20 to $25 an hour, to try to be a little bit more of an appealing position when we do start advertising, again for that position. The gasoline, historically with any position within the municipality where people are expected to use their personal vehicles to perform the jobs, there's either a town vehicle provided or fuel reimbursement. In the years past, there were some personnel issues that resulted into an employee not getting paid for any fuel reimbursement. And so adding fuel reimbursement based on what it takes, it's 10 miles a day to cover all of the spaces that are anticipated in the next fiscal year that have to be policed. So Stone Wharf, Chandler's, the Hook, what am I missing? Bennett's Cove, and then chances are Jenks Road is going to be added to that. And so that year-round loop is 10 miles at the reimbursable rate. And so that money is included for that position in the next fiscal year.
And does that position actually do that route every day?
So the current individual does the Stone Wharf, Bennett's and Chandler's.
Okay.
With this position, it is including the Hook and Jenks Road.
Yeah.
So kind of that drive-by.
Okay.
So a more complete look at the job, but also hopefully sweetens the pot.
With this particular position, we have, heard in the last several months that you're gonna anticipate having to increase. So this is a gradual increase for whatever those needs may be. And, if the board supports it, then we can move forward with it. If you think it should be cut back, there might be some pushback from some residents about that. But it very well might have to be increased in the future and maybe even be incorporated in some kind of position with another position or something like that.
And we have, some of it is offset by revenue.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So in terms of parking enforcement, have you considered, so we're giving tickets, but beyond that, we have no capability, right?
Yes.
And so have you considered anything else? And then my second question, just to ask them both at once, what is the sheriff's responsibility relative to parking? Do they work together, or is the sheriff not responsible?
So the sheriff responsibility relative to parking, the sheriff doesn't enforce any of the town parking ordinance. What the sheriff does is, the sheriff, within his contract, what he does is he goes down to those locations and he gives notices to people who don't have registered vehicles.
Okay.
And so,
But not
parking.
Not parking.
no.
So do we need any more, I mean, you had mentioned a booth kind of jokingly maybe, but I think a couple community members have wondered why we don't do that.
So I think that's a discussion, more or less revolved around the current ordinance. There is, the board did recommend the increase where after 2 days it jumps up to $50, and that has played a huge role in the revenue that we've been able to collect. But some people just don't care, and that's kind of what we found. We had one person where it was almost $2,000 in parking tickets we collected because they left that car there for weeks. And then there was, confusion of, oh, we thought somebody else was picking it up. Not my problem. And so the kind of beyond the parking in most municipalities, it's, you get a little bit of a leeway within tickets, but it's a little bit more heavily enforced. I think that's, a boot, we probably would need like 4 of them to really be able to enforce it, because you'll have one that will be sitting on a car for 3 days, potentially.
But you're sort of saying this improved graduated ticket system is working, it's helping.
The last couple of months it has helped. I think consistency plays a big role, and I think that's been a little bit more predominant than it has in the past. I do think, maybe not in this fiscal year, but in the future, there is worth a conversation, especially with the realization that you're not gonna build a lot of parking at the Stone Wharf, regardless of, what you might wanna do. That's something a little bit more heavier as far as enforcement, where after 48 hours, it's, you really hit them with a harder fine, so they're less likely to do that, and see how that works, or do something like a boot or something else.
Okay.
I think a boot would be great, but I do think we would need more than one.
Correct. The only other suggestion I would offer that we might want to consider is a similar increase, not based on longevity, but based on repeat offense. If the same people are willing to pay the fine for a 1-day violation over and over and over, then if there's 5 within 2 weeks or something, maybe the fine goes up. The
And
vehicles that are on the
within
stone
the
here.
current changes with the parking and traffic ordinance, one of the things that we did have in there is, with the resident parking, they will not be able to get a sticker until we have all their parking fees paid off. So that was language that was added in there, so.
I was thinking more about contractors. I came home yesterday and there were 2 or 3, hard to tell, 2 or 3 what appeared to be contractor trucks then, 2 for sure. Sure.
So in the sheriff contract for next year, is that a number known, or is that maybe?
So the number is not unknown, because it's typically towards the end of February that we receive the contract. I don't anticipate there be a dramatic change, simply because we are expecting the same individual return, expecting the same benefits and things like that. But that will be adjusted based. Some years it goes up. Last year it went down a couple $1,000s. So it's hard to tell and predict until we have the exact numbers.
All right.
No, I just have to say, when I look at the cost of the housing, you can purchase a tiny house and put it on by the town office, and it would be paid off in a short amount of time. I'm just putting it out there.
It is, the town pays $7,500 a year to rent a cottage from Memorial Day to Labor Day to house a sheriff. And that's one of the discussions and one of the plans with the long term of the facilities committee to have an apartment in the current fire department building. There will be space allocated for an
At
apartment.
this point, that's very low term.
But that is, yes, exactly.
But a tiny house is gonna be 150K installed, maybe more than that. That's 7,500 a year, that's a 20-year simple payback, so.
Yeah, but there's other, anyway, good.
So,
But
okay,
yeah, that's,
moving on. So we did fire department. Let's see here. We talked about planning. No, we talked about assessor.
Code enforcement, 2,400.
Thank you. Department 2,400, code enforcement, up by $9,800 in the wages line.
so the only change here is to reflect the average of 23 hours a week that the current code enforcement officer was hired at their hourly rate. You take that into a full year and that's, that's the number we come up with. So that's what's being, so with this, it's a bi-weekly of 46 hours.
Yep.
At the current rate, and that's what it brings it to.
And I think that change to that new rate occurred within this fiscal year, so we've not yet,
Yes.
budgetarily speaking, hit.
Correct. The budget for this year was, the board, I believe it was like $45,000 or something like that, a set number that they put in anticipating what the position might look like. And so this is a reflection of, based on the current hours, what the position is.
Sure.
So I guess I'm still not clear. So the budgeted amount in 2025 was not based on sort of the actual costs that we have agreed to in the current contract, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so what you're saying is this 59,800 is reflective of the contract that we've, and what is the term of that contract? I mean, is this an annual?
It's a hired employee.
Okay, so it's an
this
annual.
This is their hourly rate at what they were hired at, $50 an hour,
Okay.
of a bi-weekly of 46 hours, so 23 hours a week at $50 an hour.
Do we actually renew the contract annually from a legal
No.
standpoint?
It was a hired employee.
So
Well,
the
but we
state-
have to reappoint the CEO.
You have to
That's what-
reappoint it like
Right.
you do with any
Thank you.
others, but yeah, it was a hired employee.
I knew there was a state requirement there somewhere. So Carol?
And then on the technology side, what is I mean, I see we're well over the technology budget this year, and then
The
what?
technology was the new system that was, adopted relative to the permitting.
The iWorks?
Yeah.
So
and
is that an annual subscription?
It's an annual
About
cost.
5,000?
Yeah, and this year it went up a little because there was some, additional service maintenance
Right,
related things that we had to. Yeah, and so I have been in conversations with them about offering the service of having any resident be able to go into the system and search it, but that's an additional cost. And that's an additional cost that I have not yet been able to really finalize on with the company in terms of numbers. And so in this year's budget to date, I don't have a recommendation, and I don't think I'll be able to have a recommendation that I feel comfortable with to see if the board, because I think the residents do want kind of a true document that they can go into the website and they can look like on live terms, what all the permits are and things like that. That's an additional cost in addition to just paying for this website.
It looks at permits that are granted.
Looks at anything that's been entered into the
Pending,
system.
granted, previous, it's, it's being able to allow resident access into the view portion of the website that the code enforcement officer currently used to provide. Because what is happening now is he provides just a report on a monthly basis.
when we initially had conversations with iWorks, I thought that inquiry function was a part of the base package, so I'd like to
It
get
is
into that.
not.
I'd like to get into that conversation with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I was gonna say the same thing. So who has access to the sort of interior of iWorks now?
Our code enforcement officer, our town clerk, I have login information, but I don't go into it.
And so the planning board does not have access?
Correct.
And is it, yeah, I guess I'm with Bob. I thought the way I understood it, that was with the $5,000. I really would like to, because I have been hearing from people frustration about that, system. And
Yep.
in a way, they feel like they had better information before we had iWorks. So, and maybe we're gonna have to find a way to supplement what iWorks can do in the meantime, but I would like to know what that cost is, because I think we need to be able to give people access.
For sure, yeah.
I may have missed it, but why is the 2025 year-to-date opposed to $6,600?
Because there were some additional costs that came in that weren't in the setting up of the process. There were some additional maintenance and update and some fees
One-time
relative.
costs.
I'm sorry?
One-time
Yes.
costs?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, with all of these companies, they do end up tending to kind of sell you on a contract, but what I'm beginning to learn is there's a lot of fine print where they have a way to be able to add, hourly costs when you call for help and it's beyond the 3 hours that they allocate you, it quickly adds up, and so, those were some of the costs, but, we don't anticipate it going beyond what it has at this point.
Thank you.
John?
So related to the permitting software.
Yeah.
Does that provide feedback to the assessors when permitting is completed or occupancy permits are generated so that
So what it
people's
doesn't provide.
taxes can be adjusted as quickly as possible?
That's based on when the CO is issued, I
It's the
believe.
so the code enforcement officer software is not connected with the assessor and updates relative to that. How that works is the code enforcement officer, does their job of collecting permits, issuing permits, and updating it. Our assessors, when they come in, they look at any provided permits or any updates that have taken place within that course of the month, and then they take that information, kind of do a visit to the site, and then adjust the assessment values of those individual
Yeah, so that's my
properties.
question, is there a good smooth system so that is happening expeditiously?
It's not automated, but
Because
it
when
is an
I
output
built my
report.
guest house 12 years ago, I think it took 2 years for my
Well,
assessment to change.
the difficult part is, it's in the transition of a personnel, there's always several steps back before you're back into the same system, and if you don't have they all have state regulations and requirements they have to follow based on their jobs, but in-house systems, if there isn't a clear expectation and understanding, it's very easy to fall behind in a lot of those things. And that's where we're trying to now come up with better systems. So in the transitions, there isn't that delay of not assessing a house from 2 years ago.
So the system, iWorks, does have outputs that would streamline things, but for the system to work properly, training has to occur, the persons using the system have to be comfortable with the system, all those things have to happen. Carol?
Yeah, and I guess at some point, it would be good to understand our permit fees relative to cost of the code enforcement and software, so that we have, because maybe we should be raising our permit fees to kind of compensate for these increased costs rather than dumping them on the taxpayer. So I think that would be, I think we did bump them up not too long ago, but I don't have a good sense of what, and we had a lot of permit applications, but I think maybe now it's sort of slowed down a bit, but it would be good to know what the annual revenue is from permit fees versus what our overall costs are?
So very generally, you are able to see that information under revenue. So when we take on any, payments, relative to any of the work, it goes to a specific, general ledger account that we have set up. And so, under revenue, we don't have, so within the revenue section of the budget, there will be a section for building permits, electrical permits, and that will kind of give you a general understanding of what on an annual basis we're collecting.
So looking at that, in 2023, we had 44,000
Yeah.
building permits, and this year we have 17,000. So pretty big, pretty significant reduction.
Was there anything with that 44 that was related to delays in reporting, or was that actually that many permits in that year?
I think we had a lot of delays in reporting over the last year to year and a half, but what a lot of last year really includes a lot of very expensive permits that Hope Island took out.
So at any rate, I think it looks like on the order of 20,000 is what our permit revenue is annually versus kind of what our overall expenses are. And I think we may just want to look at that. It's not, similar to solid waste, how we think about that.
And also, how do our permitting fees compare with comparable communities?
They did get increased, when the previous code enforcement officer was here, he recommended some increases. But in the brief discussion I had with it about the current code enforcement officer, there's room for increasement in a number of areas, because what you are ultimately doing is that with positions like this, it should be fairly easy to be able to offset the cost of the salary in the collection of revenue. So when you have your, whether it's parking attendant or harbor master, code enforcement officer, the revenue that they are hired to collect should have a contributing factor towards covering the cost of their salary. And
But compared to comparable communities?
Right.
there is room
There's
to
room.
increase
And
and
is
have
that-
it be an individual person based on the work they're doing and not spread out to all the taxpayers because the fees aren't high enough.
Okay, and is that done by the code enforcement?
No, Selectboard, all of the fees relative to just about any fee the town collects, whether it's the stickers for the annual tie-ups down at the float to code enforcement officer to parking attendant, they're very easily able to be updated by the Selectboard.
Is that on our list?
To look at those fees regularly, yeah. One other thing to consider is the comprehensive plan. For example, growth permits. Right now, there's a fee for the growth permit that's quite small. And growth permit fees and related fees relative to development fund a lot of things in bigger communities. Affordable housing being one. And we don't have enough growth permits for that to have a meaningful impact. But it needs to also be looked at in terms of the aims of the comprehensive plan relative to growth and preserving character and that kind of thing.
The cost of a growth permit right now, to get a growth permit to fill out that application is $100. The old code enforcement officer recommended that we bump it up to $1,000. Just to, because what has happened in the last couple of years is with the significant increase in building out here, there was a push for the concern of running out of growth permits. And so I believe we've had 3 applicants who have had to resubmit their growth permit because they took it out, provided the information, and then they just didn't start the project. And you're supposed to start the project within a certain amount of time. If you don't, you have to reapply. And so we've had, I can think of 3 people within the last year to year and a half that have done that twice, because it's $100. But if you increase it and it, $1,000, then they might be a little bit more hesitant in letting it
Taking
lapse,
that,
because it's another $1,000 in 90 days if they don't start versus just, $100, so.
The other factor leading to some of those delays was obviously the whole supply chain debacle after COVID and all that. But still, if we think of it strategically and also think of it strategically in terms of the comprehensive plan, but also strategically in terms of making sure we're covering the cost of that system, those are good things to look at. So,
Is that something we should be looking at in this year's budget?
we could look at when we get to revenues, we could certainly talk about that. And it might also be a select board regular meeting agenda item at some point. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because so right now, if you anticipate, increasing or recommended increase in certain revenues, you would really want to, ahead of time, have discussions about increasing the rates, so then you can properly, assume and allocate what the revenue would be, because otherwise you're going to be, with revenues, with the revenues that we have, there are a lot of them that we don't even kind of budget for, because they're so, it's a hard thing to depend on unless you know exactly that you're gonna get it. So if you anticipate, $50,000 in revenue, and that's what we put in, saying that that's what we're gonna get, and we only get 30, then, your budget is assuming that you need to come up with that 20 grand elsewhere.
And as to the difficulty of forecasting that revenue, just taking the growth permit as an example, 2 or 3 calendar years ago, we had waiting lists, maybe both of those years. This year, we've only issued 2 growth permits out of the 4 that are available. So.
Fiscal year, in the current calendar year 2024, there were 3 out of 4 issued.
Oh, there's only 200 showing in revenue.
And does that include, is House Island separate from all of that?
House Island?
Sorry?
Both Island?
Hope Island. No.
No, their revenue, the revenue we receive from them goes in the same,
But when it comes to the number of growth permits, they're
part of the island, so if they want a growth permit, they have to be.
Right, but they're not adding, what they've been doing out there is not adding a new residence, so it's not a growth permit.
No. Oh, they're taking smaller buildings and, quadruple in them, which that's a renovation.
Correct.
Which doesn't require growth permit.
Yep. Okay, moving on. Everybody go with that?
so much. Thank you.
Department 2500, Harbor Master and Shellfish. The big change is based on less hours, is that right, Mika?
Yes, that's correct. So you'll see there is a significant decrease in the salary cost, and the current position, there was support. So the current employee that's in the position took another position which required them to cut back on the harbor master hours. That was supported by Coastal Waters and by the board in the initial discussions last summer. And so I had talked to the harbor master, and the current harbor master is still agreeable to continue that. And so going into the next year, what it is agreed upon is that the harbor master position is 5 hours a week between the months of September and May, and then June, July, and August, it is between 32 and 37 hours a week. And so that was reflected around the position that they took with the school. And so this reflects the decrease in the salaries around that. In conversation with the harbor master, when I sat down, going back to fuel reimbursement with use of personal vehicles, it's common that there is fuel reimbursement, and so I told the harbor master that I would make the recommendation that between for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, the hours that they're anticipated to get their full-time hours in June, July, and August, that I would recommend fuel reimbursement for the 10 hours, or the 10 miles a day. They're 4 days a week during the summer months. It's something that they used to receive several years ago, but then that stopped due to some tracking issues. And so that's why you see the fuel increase.
And do you think that schedule's working? Sorry.
I can't say that it's working because we haven't experienced, we haven't really experienced the new changes. This time of year, the hours are so minimal that I don't see really a whole lot of a change. But during the summer months, well, it's pretty much what the required hours were before. With the one thing that we have had to keep in mind is relative to the technology line 2041, these costs have increased over the last couple of years because the harbor master had recommended, and it was supported a couple of years ago, to try a new software system for mooring tracking. I actually had a meeting yesterday morning with a new company and emailed Coastal Waters explaining some information and hoping for their support. And what I would like to do is bring a recommendation in the next couple of weeks to the board to allow me to proceed with the switch, and also support the idea that annual, so right now the cost of the technology we're anticipating is $2,000 a year for fiscal year 26. It is an online software, and it is charging $5 per mooring to the municipality that they process. And so the new company is $7, and what I would like to see is we change the fee for the moorings and let the consumers know that they will be taking on that $7 charge. So their mooring would be $50 for a mooring, $7 for a processing fee. So then the municipality isn't having to allocate to cover those funds. So there would be a decrease in that. But I'm waiting to hear back from Coastal Waters to make sure that they support that idea, and then bring it back to the board to see if the board supports that idea, and then there would need to be a change in the fee schedule to make that change. As far as the wages, this is kind of, what the recommended is based on the changes that took place last summer. However, that is a change, and if the board doesn't support that change, then I think we need to go back to kind of having discussions with the current employee and determine whether you want to maintain the existing hours as they have been, or accommodate the current anticipated hours and make those decisions.
One other question, this isn't a question, but it seems to me that harbor master would be the position that could be combined with parking attendant at some point.
It was, the same person was doing two positions, both positions, and I'm not gonna say more than that, because it goes into a personnel issues that I can't discuss publicly.
Carol, you got a question?
I guess I didn't recall that we had reduced the position. Is that reflected in a revised job description? Did we create a new job description?
No.
Well, I think we should, if
I
that is the plan. And
So-
I can believe we have this discussion. I think one thing to consider is whether we should make this more of a seasonal position, this 5 hours in the winter. I'm wondering, at some point, if we should provide administrative support for the code enforcement officer and the, say, harbor master functions, other types of functions that you know, could be done at a lower cost potentially by admin as opposed to those positions. So it's just something to think about, but I don't know if the person is, you know, in that position is working 5 hours a month now.
It's 5 hours a week.
A week.
And the person in that position has been doing that, and what they do is they more or less, some of that time, just take a drive around the island to check on floats and whatnot. When there's snow, they are the ones that are shoveling the floats off.
Okay.
Relative to any calls and things like that. So back in December, we were handling shellfish related things. The harbor master is the one who communicates with the state to make sure that the shellfish numbers the state would still allocate and approve them. So there is some communication, those kind of things you're going to be taken on by administrative. The town clerk currently does perform a good chunk of administrative assistance to the current code enforcement officer. The deputy clerk has been doing some administrative assistance to the harbor master.
Okay.
And with the transition, hopefully the transition in the mooring system, we are trying to align it in a way, because right now, what the harbor master would do is they have been solely responsible for the mooring system without minimal to no administrative assistance. That is changing.
Yeah.
Because they're not able to put in the same amount of hours. And the reason for that is because they're an employee with the school and then they're an employee with the town. It's the same tax number, so we cannot exceed the 40 hours. That's
Right.
kind of, and so those are the things that we've been working on relative to the job description. The job description was adjusted a couple of years ago. Going into the budget season 25, there was a lot of conversation around the job description. That was properly adjusted. What was done between myself and the town, the school superintendent is we worked together with the town HR attorney to make sure that we more or less came up with an agreement between the employee. And so what I would recommend, because we do have kind of that agreement in place on an annual basis, you keep the job description as it is, and then the agreement with the individual employee is kind of what they're expected to follow in terms of the hours worked and things like that. So, because what would happen is if at any point the person, were to leave or something, is it worth changing the job description? But that's up to you. If you want to have an agenda item and talk about another thing, then by any means we can put that on.
One other function that is served year-round, not very predictable, but it was very important to coastal waters, and we had these discussions because referring to relative to job description. Coastal waters is expected as one part of the town to respond to all aquaculture applications within the waters of the town of Shebig, and they rely heavily on the harbor master for tracking and feedback on those applications. That was something they made very clear at the time. So those come and go.
And of course, sailboats wash ashore randomly.
Right.
So there you go.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, that was helpful.
All right, good? On that? Okay. So moving on to Department 2600, Animal Control, no change? Any questions? 3100, Public Services. Can we take a break for 5 minutes?
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, it's been an hour and a half. So.
Yeah, these are the two big
Have fun, let's
ones
get
coming
back
up.
to it.
Yep, let's try to get through this. We've got, Department 3100, Public Services.
Class.
And- So, big items, wages, in public services, full-time up by just under 12 thou, part-time up by just under 6 thou, and overtime budgeted down by 1,100. And again, I think this harkens back to our conversation about boosting capacity. Travel down by 800, coal patch up by 500, contract services up by 8,000,
Yeah.
barging down by 3,000. Those are the changes that I made note of dollar-wise. Comments from the board?
Training.
Yes.
So I remember a conversation about having a new person with training. Is that reflected here, or is that training?
The training budget is up by $1,000.
Yeah. And that's gonna be good to go?
Well, we have two, the entire Public Works Department is completely new employees, and they're very eager to learn, and there are classes. So there's one that the two of the guys are signed up to do gravel road maintenance, so they're going to a class about gravel road. One of our employees is doing, it ends up being free through Cumberland County. They offer a class through SMCC that ends up being, I think it was 8 weeks or so. I did it a couple of years ago, where it's supervisory, so you learn all about the process of being a supervisor. And so one of them is doing that, started in March. But yeah, we plan to get them trained up.
And there was talk about the certification that it takes for one of the trucks, but we do have someone on the island that does that. Are we good with other certifications that they need to have?
So at this point, the certification for the special license,
Right.
we're not gonna proceed with that, because as it stands right now, that particular truck is really one that we're looking to get rid of in the future. And so, and have the capacity where the municipal vehicles that we do have can be driven with, it all comes down to weight. And so they could be driven without having to have those special licenses.
Got it. Thank you.
David?
Why is barging down?
The barging is down because we, at this point, well, so, let me, where am I?
This can be repaired.
Barging, the barging is down because, at this point in discussion with the Public Works, what we found out is we have, of certain things, more materials than we really need, and so we're not anticipating as heavy of a flow of ordering things for next year.
So we've got more in stock than we anticipated.
So what we're learning is, with a lot of things, whether they're tools or whether they're certain materials, there was a heavier flow of ordering things than may have appeared to have been necessary. And so we're trying to, on a very small scale, cut back on some things where we think there is the flexibility to do it, but we had a conversation about this, not doing it too drastically because there are all new employees, and we really want a full cycle to go through to really determine what the needs and expectations are. But in the areas that we thought that we wouldn't dramatically go over if the cutbacks were made. I think the Public Works Department and Solid Waste are two departments where as things are progressing now, we might see a little bit more, cuts between now and, the end of the budget.
Carol?
So overall, the budget's up 14%.
Yeah.
And about over 25,000. It looks like, am I right that we're looking at a $20,000 increase in the wages from 25 to 26? And I mean, again, this is sort of similar to the administrative budget. We started off at 96,000 in '23, we're up to 120,000 in '26. So again, I just feel like we need to justify that.
Yeah, yeah, and, also in here, I just have fiscal year, but yeah, what we could do is I can, give you the breakdown. Majority of it is, you know, we had the same employees for a number of years who on the scale, you know, of, increase just received a couple dollar percentage of COLA increases, and then they left and we hired people. I mean, one of the public works employees is hired at almost a $5 hourly rate change from what the previous position are, so that's where you're seeing those dramatic increases.
So I think that would be
Breakdown,
helpful for the board to know
Yep.
why it's gone up so much, so we can respond to some anticipated questions. And that's not a reflection on the new staff.
Yeah. But it's just a good
Along those
conversation.
lines, what's happening with contract services?
Yeah.
That's large, that's the floats, right?
Floats, right?
The contract services, the cost of the floats is a new thing we did it this year. We had somebody that, the town paid to assist in the removal of the floats. And, the current is really more or less on like a year trial basis. And so for the upcoming fiscal year, what the budgeted recommended cost is in line with the higher quote that we had received for the maintenance, the original company that we were going to hire. And I'm comfortable keeping it that way because the conversations that I've already had with the contractor that removed it, while the cost was less, there was confusion in terms of what he thought was going to be covered and what our expectation was.
And do I remember us discussing the fact that having a new employees in the department, having them learn from how it's happening, perhaps that could become reduced in the coming year? They know how to do some of that maintenance, the float removals?
So the current recommendation from the coastal waters is that, you know, they recognize that the Public Works Department can and should do maintenance, but what was decided ultimately on is to contract out a company that will remove and do major maintenance in recognition that it's not a Public Works job description to do marine infrastructure or marine maintenance to floats. And
Would we ever anticipate that would be able to happen?
so with the fiscal year 26 budget recommendation, what is anticipated and what's being recommended is to continue what was just recently voted on, is to have an outside company be contracted out for the removal and the placement of the floats, and then provide us with a list of what the maintenance is needed. We do have a great capacity with as new as the crew is for maintenance for vehicles, but the marine infrastructure maintenance isn't there. And so I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, let's push this current crew to take over that responsibility, because I don't think that really aligns with what Coastal Waters had recommended and what the board had decided and what.
I think conversation for the future.
Okay. Thank you.
Others? All right. Moving on to solid waste, Department 3200.
You guys don't have any other questions about Public Works?
Not,
So I will say one thing about this particular department. So we did have, about a month or so ago, we had a visit from workers' comp and from liability insurance auditors from
I'm
the.
sorry, you're talking about Public Works?
The town had an audit for workers' comp and liability, and so Maine Municipal, it's something that they try to do on an annual basis. It had been a couple of years since somebody was out here. They go through and they look at any of our assets that are insured. They take pictures, and so what I just received, and I have a schedule on or a meeting on Monday with Maine Municipal is the Public Works, the shed, the salt building is, according to them, is not in the best of shape as a result to being overfilled in previous years. And so it will need some maintenance to it. And so there might be, based on that conversation, an impact on the budget relative to that, but that might have something to do more or less with capital maintenance. The current crew and I have discussed, and what the plan is when winter is over, completely remove the sand from that building and to try to have the crew reinforce it. With the email that I received the day before yesterday from Maine Municipal, there was a reference to an engineering study telling us how the work should be done. And so I do have a follow-up call on Monday to really clarify a lot of those questions. I think that crew would be capable to make sure that it's reinforced properly, but that might not be sufficient enough for the insurance, and I don't want to have an impact on the overall coverage. So that's, at this point, the only kind of new unexpected thing that is a surprise. The service to the burners, the anticipated cost as far as what was budgeted, we're still looking in terms of, based on the service we just received and what the annual costs might be with that, and those numbers are looking to be lower than what we currently have in the budget. But that's one of the things that I say that there could be some small increases. They're not going to be several $1,000s, but just little decreases that you might see in this particular budget between now and, finalizing it.
Okay, Carol.
just one thing that came up last year, and I don't quite know where it would appear in the budget, but apparently we had a practice of accepting materials from outside parties for hazardous waste disposal. And I remember when so I guess, what is the status of our hazardous waste storage at the Public Works? And are we no longer accepting, stuff from anybody but the town?
So the hazardous waste is one of the departments that, where am I here?
Solid waste.
So is it in solid waste
Yeah.
even though it's Public Works?
No,
Okay,
The line item.
wait, I'm sorry, yes, yep.
so we
Yeah,
can wait to
hazardous
talk
waste,
about
yeah.
that when we get
Sorry.
there.
Other conversations about Public Works? Okay, moving on to solid waste, Department 3200. Building maintenance up by 5,000. Shipping and grinding brush, budget up by 7,500. Landfill monitoring down by 11,000. And hazardous waste up by 3,000. Questions, comments?
Same question on the hazardous waste, because my recollection was we were accepting waste from contractors at the public.
Some, but not all, right?
I don't know how it was. And then also, maybe I was concerned that maybe we were including materials that were not specifically hazardous waste, but then paying for the disposal. So can you give us a heads up on that?
Yes, so I have had a pretty lengthy conversation with Jeff about this department in general. Hazardous waste is something that has seen an increase across the board in terms of what people are disposing, and what had historically happened is people would drop off things like their fuel oil at Public Works and just leave it there. And so the crew would collect, and some of whatever they were collecting was able to be burned in the furnace. There wasn't a really great setup for it. And then we had the hazardous waste weekends. And it is still in the current ordinance saying that the town may have one every other year. That language was specifically changed a couple of years ago because there became such a heavy expectation that people would kind of collect things. Hazardous, there's a variety of different things that's considered hazardous waste, like paint and things like that. And so what Jeff has started doing is taking very detailed notes about what is coming in, and day-to-day trash, a lot of things that people are bringing in is considered hazardous waste that cannot just simply be disposed in the trash. Like, for example, paint. If you bring a bucket of unused paint, you can't throw that away. You can throw away an empty can that's completely dried out, which there was a very terrible practice a few years back where a bunch of paint cans would be sitting in the back waiting to be dried out, and we put a stop to that. And so there's nothing to say that a person can't drop off cans, but the town doesn't have a good disposal process of it. And so what Jeff has been doing has been keeping a notice of how much more of those materials are being brought in, and recognizing that the expense on the municipal level is going up in doing that. He has worked very meticulously to eliminate any old piled up stuff. And now we're just working kind of on, as things come in, to dispose them. And so in discussion with him, he did recommend and felt more comfortable if there was a little bit more based on what the increased volume is to be able to properly dispose it, which is why you're seeing the increase now.
Carol?
I sort of question whether we should be accepting hazardous waste at the town transfer station, because once you get above a certain volume, then we become a hazardous, we have to do a manifest. There's a lot of requirements, and
Yes.
I really think, I don't want to get into this discussion today. I think we need a better system to manage this issue.
Yeah.
And having just completed the groundwater study, I feel compelled to say something about this, but I would suggest, I can follow up with Jeff directly, but I think there's, I think the town needs a better system than, allowing people to drop off stuff, and people also being potentially contractors who I think we should be encouraging them to take it off the island, not leaving it at our transfer station. So I think this is a bigger conversation that I don't want to have now.
You're absolutely right, and he's very well aware of that, and I think it's a better plan for the future to have to accommodate. I think where he's found a challenge is to not allow an increased volume to kind of collect and then deal with it, because then you're running into the issue of not having trained people and properly mix the chemicals and distributing them and so forth, and to try to keep up with it as it's coming through a lot of things until a better plan is come up. the concern and the reason for doing this is because of the concern that if there isn't the place to be able to distribute it, are they gonna dump it in their backyard? Are they gonna compile it? And so you're totally right, Carol, a better plan needs to be come up.
And I think the town needs to return to having a hazardous waste day. Long Island just had one. I think we need to, so I think, again, it's a separate conversation. I'm not even sure this budget might be enough. I do want to clarify, though, is the practice of people, originally I understood, and maybe I'm mixed up, but they were delivering particularly paint to the public works building, which was being incorporated into what I thought was a hazardous waste storage container that we had there. So is the only place people are delivering stuff now the transfer station, and what's the hazardous waste management at the public works building?
So the public works building, as they're working right now, there is no,
Zero.
no collection,
Right.
and that's kind of more or less why there is more of an increase in the solid waste, because they're preventing from any of that to be able to make its way to public works.
Okay, so I think we've drifted into operations. I think it's a good question as to whether we've got enough of an increase in there if we're going to have a hazardous waste day every year, or even a hazardous waste day this year, budget-wise.
Right.
We might need to revisit that $3,000 increase. I have added an item for the agenda list to have a select board discussion about our hazardous waste processes and system and hazardous waste day. Probably need to have that sooner as opposed to later. Eliza and then Carol.
And we do have information from the survey about the transfer station about willingness to pay costs of hazardous waste.
Okay, Carol.
So on 5120, the landfill monitoring, we did negotiate, the DEP has agreed to let us, modify our monitoring program with the hope that we will eliminate it in 3 to 6 years. But this amount of $600 is probably not enough for the monitoring that so we basically have agreed to do residential well monitoring every other year. My guess is that cost every other year would be, on the order, it'd be more than 600. I'll try to get you the number. That's
Okay.
just not quite enough for that. So. But all in all, it's a cost savings, which is a good thing.
Okay. All right. Yes.
Briefly, has Jeff mentioned anything again about wanting to build a new hut for him to be in that's more closer to the entrance, making it more like a garden?
So we've had in the discussion relative to solid waste as a whole, what the goal is, and that was there was some information about it in the memo, is really to try to focus next year on hiring a company. He has been in contact with CD and Mahar to do like a facilities analysis, looking at the entire operation as a whole and determine what are the needs of that. And in the process, not invest any big chunks of money until that is done. However, there is some small improvements that we're going to do in the upcoming fiscal year, which is as little as replace the shed window, just so that way it's functional. Maybe, he has improved it quite a bit on his own with scrap materials, and so just teeny tiny replacements, but the focus really is to try to do a professional company to do an overhaul study to help us determine what the needs are, and then do a better long-term plan of that.
Great, thanks.
And such a building project like that, even just a new shed, would probably wind up in the capital budget as
And
opposed.
so last year, there was a recommendation to replace the shed. Money was put in based on a quote that we received. We did revisit that and I got another quote and we're kind of moving in that direction. But then the more time that he spent there, the more it was, nope, this is too soon. A nice building would be great, but a whole overhaul should be the first focus, and so that kind of prevented from that, which I agree with and I support that decision.
Right, good. Okay, moving on, the next item is Department 4400 miscellaneous mainland. This is the annual payment that's detailed out in a long-term spreadsheet schedule. It's an increase of $994. It increases a little bit every year. Questions, Carol?
Just a comment that I think in capital planning, we may find that that's not enough. And so I think right now, no changes, but I think that budget is meant to cover the replacement, my understanding is, of the wharf on Cousins Island.
Correct.
And so I think we will ask the finance committee to kind of give us some insight into that.
And because you know offhand how much is, that doesn't show up in our Machias accounts, does it?
No, because that account is controlled and maintained by the town of Yarmouth,
Do
and
you remember how
so
much is in it roughly?
there's about, the last time, there was about $479,000 and change, 480 and change. Yeah, and so this money we send to Yarmouth, Yarmouth deposits it in that account, and then they contribute 20%.
Yeah, it's a nice capital amount, but if we were going to do anything major to upgrade that pier, sea level rise, all that kind of thing, it's not even close to what we need, so. Okay, thanks, Carol. Moving on, the next department is 4600 contributions. We'll be dealing with that on a separate meeting.
Correct.
Next department is 5810 general assistance, no change. That's a state requirement.
Yep.
Next department, 5910 health services, no change.
There's no change as of now. I did receive an email yesterday that our health officer, as of January 1st, has resigned.
Oh.
So,
Resigned or retired?
resigned.
Okay.
Um,
Is that the same for Anita?
Yeah. There's a reason behind it that I can't get into at this
Okay.
point, but we are state required to have a health officer, and I do have some information to MMA, as well as asking Long Island to see if we can very quickly find a new one at a very low cost.
Okay.
Was that resignation effective immediately?
I received the email on the 7th, and it was effective January 1st.
I quit.
Okay. Okay. Next department is 6200 cemetery. I think Vika referred earlier to the change relative to line 1010.
Yep.
Any questions? Okay. Next department is debt service. Vika, do you want to talk about that a bit?
So this is all the debt that the town has signed on. It's very easy. You look at the debt schedule and you plug in the number that we're supposed to pay. And based on fiscal year 26, these are the numbers that we're gonna have to pay. The only thing is you have the broadband interest and principal. These numbers have been added into a revenue column. So these numbers, you know, are gonna offset themselves, but that information will go into revenue. The broadband interest and principal,
It's in the area called revenue, which is several pages down, which we won't be going into today, I don't think, because it's mostly not updated yet, right? We're just talking about expenses.
no, a lot of it's not updated. A couple things have been updated, but not a lot of it, no.
Yeah. All right, so the next big item, Department 7500, benefits and insurance. Large increase in health and life insurance, increase in FICA Medicare, increase in retirement, increase in liability insurance. Some of this is related to things we've already talked about, and Vika, any more to?
Yeah, I mean, I did, In the early stages, you guys asked if I anticipated any increases. I said, no, I don't anticipate any increases. What has happened is the town just went through a lot of employees changes with, really didn't have a big impact on the insurances because the employees that were replaced were already collecting benefits, and so there was already a cost associated. Where we saw really a big gap and an increase is annually there is an open enrollment. And so we had at least 3 employees who previously either weren't, their health insurance costs changed because they either, versus before not choosing to enroll, chose to enroll, or they added somebody. And so that really had a big hike on the overall health insurance costs, in addition to, I believe there was an 8% increase from one year to the next. So as a result of that, that had overall impact on the benefits. As far as the FICA and Medicare, that number had to be adjusted due to the new salaries of the new employees. We have, a certain percentage that we have to allocate for FICA and Medicare. Retirement, we had a number of employees in the previous positions that chose not to take advantage of their retirement. Some of the new employees have recently signed up for it. Liability insurance is a big jump, and that more or less has a lot to do with how they used to bill versus how they bill us now. And so there is going to be, in the next couple of months, some shifts relative to the town's liability insurance due to their most recent visit here. And so this is the number that we're currently budgeting based on what we have provided from them, but that number might change. As of now, that number might go down because I was recently notified that they're not going to cover the stone pier for insurance, but I will be meeting with them on Monday to try to get more information about that.
Should we ask about the stone pier, or
Yeah.
what do you mean they're not covering them?
So the liability insurance is something that we pay because Maine Municipal assesses all of our assets, and that's the insurance. With the visit that we had from liability and for workers' comp, they provided us with a summary, but then just the day before yesterday, I believe, I got a slew of emails, and one was letting me know that due to the way that the stone wharf is constructed, it's not considered as a covered area, and that was $500,000. And so I have a set of questions that I provided. I'll be meeting with her on Monday. The town absolutely needs to have coverage on the stone wharf.
But as of right now,
It was effective the day that she emailed me, which was the day before yesterday, so, yeah.
A good time to get hurt on the stone pier. Sue the
The
town.
stone pier itself is not being covered.
Oh, you're talking about the
It's not-
structure.
The structure, yeah,
The
not
structure,
the structure.
Not the fact that if
Oh, I
somebody
thought you
runs-
meant
No. Oh, sorry, I'm kind of throwing a lot of different things for you, yeah.
so we do still have liability coverage.
So,
Okay,
yes.
I misunderstood,
Yeah, no,
'cause
sorry,
I-
I gave you too much at once.
Okay.
That was my fault.
Okay, so the structure itself is not insured.
I can understand that.
It's because it's made out of granite and boulders, basically, but it,
On top of mud and old ships and fire.
It's still standing. so.
Still standing. Okay, Carol.
So I guess, I just want to understand in a nutshell, in terms of our health and our health insurance especially, what is, so we have, are we paying, I mean, I know what the school side does, I don't exactly know what the town side does. I think I heard you say that anybody who works over 18 and a half hours a week is eligible for benefits.
yes.
And do we pay full benefits for, just let me finish the question, full benefits for those people? If people opt to do family coverage, are we paying that, or are we just giving them single subscriber and they pay the balance? So those are kind of my two questions about health insurance.
So the current town employee handbook, the way that it is applicable to the town employees is if an employee is a full-time employee and they work over 37 hours, their benefits for an individual is covered 90%. For a family is 80%. If they work between 18 and a half and 37 hours, then it's on a prorated basis based on the hours that they work.
For both.
Correct.
And if I understand correctly, on the school side, they basically just get the single subscriber 100%.
Yeah, the school.
And they pay the balance.
Yeah, the school does 100% coverage of individual, and then that's subtracted from the total bill if it's a family, and then they pay the difference.
And do you have a sense of how our benefits on the town side compare to other communities?
Very similar. Municipalities, I have not found any municipalities that do not have health insurance through Maine Municipal. So Maine Municipal Association is who the town has benefits from, and it's Anthem coverage. Maine Municipal provides, I believe it's 4 different type of plans, from kind of the best, most expensive to the cheapest one. The town of Shebig does have the cheapest one out of all those. And so I have not come in contact with any municipality that is not utilizing Maine Municipal.
I guess my question was more related to the percentage coverage of, say, the family plan. Is that the norm, that other towns cover 80% of the family plan?
It varies.
Because, I mean, I gotta say, I'm a little concerned about the increase. I get, and it sounds like we've got people that maybe had health insurance through another mechanism that are now opting into the town insurance?
Correct. When an employee is hired, they have to fill out the paperwork if they're applicable. If they choose not to enroll according to the employee handbook, they get a stipend, which it's $125 a month for a full-time employee. There is a seasonal enrollment window, which is typically between November and December. And at that point, those employees, which we just went through that process, we have, I believe it's 3, but I think it might be 2 employees who have been employed with us, who we were paying the stipend for on a monthly basis, have now chosen to take on the town benefits. There is, Andrew and I were actually talking about it, there is, I think, room for revisiting that process, because the town, you know, like for example, the town, you know, if you're offering it across the board to all the employees, but you are taking on a heavier expense if an employee chooses to take on a family versus individual, and that also doesn't come out to be a fair play across the employees. And so if an employee doesn't add their family on it and it's just them, you're covering 90% of it, but you know, that employee could potentially cost the town, you know, let's say $10,000. If another employee is applicable for it and they choose a family, that could cost the town $25,000. I'm not using accurate numbers, but it's not very even across the board.
Right, and it's not, I mean, our school employees are also town employees, and they have a different arrangement because they come from 2 different entities, and I guess that's something, I'm glad to hear that you're thinking about that, because my goal is, I get it, I mean, everybody needs health insurance. I'm wondering if we can't, make it more equitable, or at least think about that in terms of the actual, cost per employee. So just something worth considering, because I think it's great that we can provide probably very good coverage to these employees. Even the bottom of the tier is probably better than a lot of private insurance, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's maybe really trying to evaluate, and I would not be opposed to providing 100% of the individual coverage, but maybe rethinking the family balance. Just to try to be more fair to everyone.
No, I totally agree.
Other comments? Is that something we want to try to take on as part of this budget cycle?
You can, but that's not gonna really have an impact on what needs to be budgeted, because the town just went through an enrollment process. And so the employees that are signed on with Anthem, those are kind of the plans that are in effect until December.
I guess what I would suggest is maybe once the finance committee kind of tackles the capital budget, that maybe that be an agenda item to discuss with the finance committee, because I think it needs to kind of be considered sort of holistically. And maybe, the finance committee can provide some suggestions. I think it would be good to almost have that as a separate, rather than the board. So
I think that, so one of the things, now that I've been in this position for a couple of years, the employee handbook has not been changed or adjusted. It's been adjusted twice since the time I've been here, and it was for very minimal things. And so a lot of the benefits that are being offered are the same exact things that were being offered when I got hired 8-9 years ago. And the town doesn't have a process set in place. They may be revisiting every couple of years whether, this retirement company is the most cost effective for the town and for the employees. And so those are kind of, now that I've been in this position for a couple of years, I'm trying to think of, could it be worth revisiting what the benefits are and how they work, or the retirement company that we use, or some of the other benefits. So not only is it, beneficial for the employees, but more cost effective for the taxpayers as a whole.
And I think that, sorry, I just have to stand up for a bit. Looking at what the school offers and the town offers, I think that doing some averaging of the two, meeting somewhere in the middle makes sense.
I think it's
It's a
not
big
uncommon to
conversation.
have towns kind of have different arrangements,
It's
but
not-
they are
it's
both
usually
municipal
like that.
employees, and I think we should recognize that a lot, providing benefits is probably a big draw to acquire and maintain employees, so we don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot that way, but I just think we should look at it.
It was certainly part of the conversation in the hiring of some of the new people.
Right, so,
And so the school, what they do is we do have the Shebig and the Long Island employees on one plan to make it more cost efficient. Why we don't have the school employees under Maine Municipal, I don't understand. Or why we don't, those are all some of the conversations that Aaron and I have started to have. How do we kind of keep it separate, but make it a little bit more
And with the school, it's also
impactful.
contractual in nature, so,
Yeah.
Nice.
To scale it a little bit, I'm gonna skip down just for this conversation, then we'll go back up to our departmental review. And Dika, please correct me if I'm not doing this correctly. If you look down at overall expense totals at the bottom of page 34, you'll see that 2026 initial is 4,486 versus 2025 budget $4,141,000.
you're talking about the total budget.
Total. And this is very, very rough numbers because we haven't input the school yet. But if you look at those, the total budget without adjusting revenue, all that kind of thing, 4,486 versus 4,141, the difference is 345,000. If you subtract what is currently in here for capital, that's a difference of 212,500 between those two. So to some degree, our operational expense increases are $132,548. Okay, and again, this is very, very napkin kind of stuff, back of the napkin kind of stuff. And then if you go, so 132K, 133K, if you go back up to the conversation we were just having about benefits, 37,000 of that 132K is in the health insurance line. 13,000 of it is liability insurance, 10,000 of it is in Medicare, FICA Medicare. So it's just scaling the size of it, and it's not unique to Shabik. Every town, every school district, every employer deals with these insurance changes, and you can eat it, you can change benefits, there are all kinds of options, but that puts it into how it fits into our expense, puts it in the context of how our expenses are stacking up. And the capital is a much larger increase than the operating expense. We've talked about capital once, we'll certainly be talking about it again. So, is that enough on insurance for now? John?
One quick question. Maine started something called Paid Family and Medical Leave Act,
Right.
Yeah.
which everybody has to pay is it 0.5%? Is that in there somewhere?
Yeah, and that's something that I was gonna raise, and you beat me to it. So one of the expenses that are within these expenses is, as of January 1st, the state of Maine, the paid family medical leave. So every employee, it's 1% basically of the salary. And so the employer can choose whether to have that 1% come out of the employer or split it.
Yeah.
And so what Shabik has is it's split. And that's what ISB commonly does across pretty much any municipality that I've seen email exchanges on. So it's half coming out of the employees' paychecks, and the other half is covered by the town. And that, it's not enormous, but that adds several $1,000s to the overall cost of it.
And you have that in line
And
1220.
it's, yep.
I thought it was actually 0.5% total. But I
No.
could be wrong.
I think that's what I understood, 1%.
1%, it's so you
No,
could.
I'm saying that through some nonprofit stuff that I was involved with,
It's,
I
so
think
for
some of the
all,
nonprofits are paying 0.5.
it's different,
Is
yep,
municipal different?
it's different, they're different,
okay.
they're different, we had to, our bookkeeper worked very closely with our payroll company to make sure that every employee was perfectly set up, and that's something that it wasn't within this budget. We didn't have it, properly budgeted, but they are numbers, and this is where it's great with him being such a Excel guru. We have all these neat Excel spreadsheets with all of this information that made it very easy for me to provide and show you a dramatic increase.
So the flip side of that, though, is they do get that benefit if they need it.
Yes.
It's an
Yeah.
added benefit.
Yeah. And that's something that our payroll company, we had to switch, helped us, and is keeping track of.
Okay, enough on insurance for now?
Yeah.
It's fun, but let's move on.
Yeah. So skip past the school and come down to page 30, Department 8100, streetlights.
Okay, someday Jen and I would love to see that get reduced. We do have all LED streetlights.
Yes. Stonework just within, I think it was last year that they upgraded, they were the last ones to be. And so yes, the entire island is LED.
But part of this, is this just the electrical cost?
These streetlights?
Yeah.
It's just all the streetlights,
so-
yeah.
It's just the electricity for the streetlights. There's no-
Just the electricity for the streetlights, and this cost is a cost that will and is not part of the solar panels.
Right, so I think someday maybe the climate action team could tackle that, but not today.
Moving on. Department 8300, contingency.
What page are you on, just because I've lost it?
31.
Okay. Yep.
Contingency was budgeted last year at 30. We've not, I thought we took something out of it earlier this year. Did we?
Not yet. We're
not yet.
Getting close.
Yep,
Okay.
nothing's been motioned and voted on.
I recommend we keep it where it is for now unless,
Yep. Well, yes, correct. Any other comments on that? Okay. Taxes paid to Cumberland, not something we have control over.
right.
Richard and I did get to hear a very long diatribe from the two new commissioners or administrators or something from a budget standpoint of the Cumberland County.
So is there an increase? We don't know yet.
So we.
You're talking 8,900 now. Is that where you are?
Yes.
8,900. So the 8,900 until the Cumberland County provides us the number, I don't know what it is.
But it is probably gonna go up.
Last
that's
year
what
it
they
went down a little bit.
I was gonna say, yes, it
Okay.
fluctuates.
Yeah.
What will happen is, the county switched to a different fiscal
Right,
year.
right.
And so for 6 years, the town is paying off half of a year on a 6-year basis. And so when that is done, it is gonna drop by like $40,000 or something like that.
Okay.
Right, so that's 8,900 and 8,800 capital improvements, and that is it, taking us down to further conversations on capital.
So 9,000, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Right? Is that where we are?
well, we're done with today's agenda.
We're not gonna talk about 9,000.
No, we're not talking
Okay.
about capital today. I was just listing what's left. So our second round of conversations about capital, our conversations about revenue, and our conversations with the school. I think the next step, next Wednesday, will be reviewing where the budget is now after any changes we made today, which so far we have not made any
Not made
changes
any
today.
changes, right?
Correct. That being said, do we want to review the schedule? Do we want to do something else next Wednesday? Move something up in the schedule? We could,
Such as?
well, I'm not sure it makes a whole lot of sense to talk about capital again until we know more. I don't think we can move the school conversation because they've got their process and we've got our dates with them lined up with their process.
So maybe we don't have a meeting.
We have to talk about,
I would skip it then.
the hook, the land trust.
That's not a, well, that's an individual budget conversation that would fall
It's not a
under.
budget conversation, but we do have to, we agreed to that last one.
Right, but that's not a,
For a regular
It's for a regular
meeting
meeting, not a
discussion.
budget meeting.
so Wednesday was set up just to be a budget meeting, yes.
So I recommend we cancel that meeting.
Vika, any thoughts about that?
I'll be operated on, so I wasn't even
So
gonna be
it's-
able to be here.
We're
so.
talking next Wednesday, 12/12, second draft for budget and discussion. I see no point in having that meeting till we are at a point where we have something to talk about. It's not like we don't have enough meetings. So then the next budget meeting would be the Saturday on 3/1 for the nonprofits, correct?
Which, I am not gonna be in town that weekend, so I'm wondering and seeing if the board would be okay if we have that discussion on Wednesday, the 26th.
From Saturday the 1st.
Correct. It is departmental discussion. I asked the department, or not departmental, I'm sorry, contribution, so it's all of the nonprofits. And so I asked them to have the information to me by the 10th,
So you're saying
which
June
is,
26th.
in extra, like, I think week or two compared to what we've done in the past. Once I receive all of that, I was just gonna, provide, you know, the folder location for you, where all that information, and so you had a couple of weeks to really, dig into that instead of receiving it a week in advance.
So you're talking about Wednesday, 2/26 in the evening?
If you're okay with that, that would be really helpful for me, and if you're okay with that, we will obviously notify the nonprofits to let them know that that's the date that the discussion would take place,
And
but
that's moving it from what day?
from March 1st
Saturday.
to February 26th. So having it be a Wednesday meeting
As opposed
instead
to
of a
Saturday.
Saturday morning.
I'm fine with that personally.
Work for me.
All right.
So we're dropping this Wednesday and we're moving the 1st to the 26th.
So we're deleting next Wednesday.
We're dropping that
You're
meeting.
dropping that day.
12, excuse me, the 12th is gone. That's what we.
Nice.
And then our regular meeting is 12, that's not on here, is 12/19.
Our next regular meeting is.
Correct.
And that's when we can talk about some of these other things.
Yes.
We can talk what?
And about other things, but Vika, did I hear you say you were gonna try to put the agenda together for that meeting?
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna connect with Bob my plan was to connect with Bob on Monday, and based
Okay.
on the discussion and the information that we have so far, try to come up with as much of an agenda as I can for Tuesday.
Yep.
And then have that be fairly done, and then if any adjustments need to be made, then you can let Chris know, and then she would advertise that on Fridays typically. The reason that I want to try to do that is because the following Monday, the 17th, is a holiday, so we can't wait until that day to post it, because then we wouldn't be within our time frame.
Right.
And so
That works.
if,
Wow, it's 11:30.
It is. 2.5 hours of fun. All right, I think that we've gotten through what we wanted to get through today from the budget workshop standpoint. Any parting shots across the bow? Hearing none.
Nicely done,
The
Vika.
workshop is over. Thank you, Vika, so much. Nice job prepping.